Welcome everybody. I'm happy to be able to moderate this panel here today on alternative proteins and their use in aquaculture feeds and how they contribute to a more sustainable aquaculture industry. I have a very high profile panel here today, not very diverse as you just said, Rob, but still. So just very short introductions. I have Erwin Suwendi on the far end. He's the head of aquaculture nutrition for JAPFA. Then I have Adrian. I've been complimented on the way I pronounce your name, and I'm very proud of it. He is with Adisseo, which is a feed additive company based, I think, out of Singapore. Yep. Then I have Clement. He's the president and founder of InnovaFeed, which is an insect company, so an alternative protein company. Then I have Diener, who's the COO of AgriProtein, one of the biggest and longest out there companies, insect producing companies in the world. And then I have, last but not least, I have Koremans, who's the CEO of Nutreco, Scratting being the biggest salmon feed producer in the world, but also one of the biggest shrimp feed producers. So I am supposed to let you guys vote on the questions, but no one seems to be doing it, so please go and do that. All right, this is a tie. All right, okay, yeah. Should we go to the second question, or okay?
One vote for price.
All right, well, okay, there we go. Now it's slowly coming up. That's actually interesting. So we have a close competition here between taste and price. Nutritional benefits is now coming up. Interesting. Taste. I would love for taste to win because taste is essentially one of the real USPs that seafood actually has. Anybody of you want to comment on the outcome so far?
No. It's only 17 people so far.
Okay. All right. Okay.
I think what's interesting about this is no one is talking about sustainability. It's 0 votes so far, so I'm a bit.
Which is very interesting.
Yeah.
Probably
okay,
on the wrong
thank you. Yeah.
All right. I would just announce taste to be the winner here now. The other seem to be competing a little bit, but no one's going to make a big impact. Okay, and then the second question we have: what is the biggest challenge affecting aquaculture producers in Asia today? Reducing production mortality is here in the lead. Seeking alternatives to fish meal is only 11%. Good thing that's what the panel is about, so great. Okay, yeah, reducing production mortality. This is obviously a health-related issue, and as a matter of fact, I would agree with that. This is the main bottleneck to farming new species, for example. But back to the topic. Let me start with Rob. Does the aquaculture industry have a feed sustainability problem today?
Oh, Carsten, I think for sure we have a challenge, right? So if you look at sustainability, I've been seeing here mortality, reducing mortality. Disease is still an extreme challenge. People often refer then to antibiotics in producing fish or shrimp. But I think if you put it in a little bit of a broader perspective, and this is a weird statement, but today mortality on humans is the biggest cause of death for humans is cancer. All the projections for 2050 will actually be that it's antibiotic incidence related. So the overusage of antibiotics is more than just a sustainability challenge. I think in our entire industry we've been making fantastic progress. We are producing, for instance, a salmon feed that is completely vegetarian, but still only vegetarian is not going to be the solution. There's always a challenge, and we'll have to tackle that.
So how come this particular feed hasn't become the standard yet in your feed?
First of all, price, I would say, and getting a high enough scale of all the elements, and even soy isn't. I mean, to get from responsible soy sources, it's at the right price and quantity is a challenge. So it's a constant challenge to fight, absolutely.
Interesting, thank you. So one thing I forgot to do is to better define the topic we're actually talking about, because alternative proteins in feeds, this has nothing to do with cell-based feed or cell-based meat or any sort of plant ingredients for food like Impossible Burger, because these guys are also claiming that this term alternative protein, this is changing mainly fish meal and soy protein concentrate, which is the standards today in Europe anyway, but also in Southeast Asia and the Americas in aquaculture feeds, changing that, substituting that or complementing that with alternative proteins such as insects, bacteria, which is single cell protein is the term for all different sorts of bacteria. Alan was talking about that, I believe, earlier. And also microalgae and potentially macroalgae. And those are yet not found in feeds as a standard anywhere, as far as I know. Although this is now finally, hopefully changing, and this is what I would like to, maybe talk to you about. Let's start with Clement. Tell me a little bit about what you've done to get your company where it is, because I know you've got some collaborations with industry, and what made the difference for you to achieve that?
Okay, maybe what's important is not starting to discuss with your direct customer, but engaging the food value chain. And especially, you need to start by understanding what the end consumer is willing to consume. Consequently, we started by doing thorough market studies about what consumers in Europe, Asia, and United States want. And we found out that taste and naturality matter. We found out that sustainability matters. And we found out that price is still very important. So you need to get competitive products. And based on this quantitative insight, you can start engaging in discussion with the downstream part of the value chain. And what we have done, for instance, is we have secured a partnership with a French leading retailer of fish, Auchan, which is commercializing now insect-fed trout and marketing them as such. And once you have been able to secure such visibility, it changes completely the discussion you have with your direct customer. And the discussion becomes how we can improve the value pool with our product and ingredients. And there are two ways to improve the value pool. It's doing joint R&D to develop better products and doing joint marketing for the product. And what's interesting is you can go with your client marketing fish feed including, aqua feed including insect meal to the client of your clients. And this creates a lot of value. And consequently, in that case, having Offtake agreement or large contract become a mere formality.
Okay, thank you. So what I hear between the lines here is essentially that the feed manufacturers are lazy to go out to the consumer and actually change their perception, and they leave it up to poor little startups to do the job. Maybe, Erwin, do you want to comment on that? So Clement said that he's essentially going to the consumer to essentially establish a pull from the consumer to the farmers, who then pass that on to the feed manufacturers. Why do the feed manufacturers not proactively help with that?
Hello. Well, to me, as one of the leading feed manufacturers in Indonesia, basically those alternative protein like the insect meal, the single cell protein, is very interesting and is the future of our ingredients. And the animal itself need the nutrients. They don't need the ingredients. So as us, we need the quantity and also the quality, right? And then the reasonable price. That's the way how it works. So far, a lot of suppliers come and see me and over me, things like, the insect meal, microalgae meal, and still it doesn't meet the current economical scale of business. So that's the problem. And we see at the ends of the customer in Indonesia, we're talking about the Indonesia customer, the local customer, they never care about what the fish will eat. They just care about how they can improve their productivity. How can they optimize their FCR how can they reduce the mortality? That's it. They are not looking more into the, what the fish we're gonna eat. They're just only concerned about the growth.
So John, you're largely active here in Southeast Asia with AgriProtein. Can you confirm that statement? And what do you do to sort of mitigate that notion?
Yeah, I mean, look, I used to be the CEO of an aquaculture, nutrition, and genetics company here in Southeast Asia, so I know exactly what he's talking about. I mean, as a feed company, you're sort of sandwiched between ingredient suppliers and customers. And customers expect higher and higher performance, but they're not always willing to pay for higher performance because they also have to sell on and they have a certain farm gate price, et cetera, and they do need to make a margin. What we're seeing now is that with the legacy ingredients that aquaculture nutritionists had, you could only go so far with that. And at the round table that we had this morning, we started to hear some of the themes that are coming up that nutrition is not meeting the genetic potential of the animal. The nutrient density isn't high enough. The amino acid profile isn't balanced correctly, etc. What's really exciting, I think, in the aquaculture nutrition and nutrition in general is that you now have a lot more ingredients to work with. And with that larger range of ingredients, you can have a much more fine-tuned nutritional profile of the feed, and not just in terms of amino acids, et cetera, but these various ingredients have different additional benefits, and they behave in different ways. So if you look at, for example, insect protein, which we produce, it also has immunostimulant properties, et cetera. So if you look at what's important here, the top two items there are related to farm productivity. You've got reducing mortality and improving feed conversion ratio. Actually, feed conversion ratio and mortality are directly related, right? You reduce mortality, your FCR goes down significantly. And the new ingredients that you see coming out, like insect protein, like these single-cell proteins and callista and so forth, give nutritionists a much better ability to formulate a diet that's going to perform to the genetic potential of the animal and give the farmers the benefit. I think the challenge if you're a feed formulator is you're going off of a least cost formulation, but what needs to be included in that least cost formulation profile is those additional benefits around faster growth. We know that a certain inclusion of some of these ingredients yields a faster growth and a reduced mortality. With reduced mortality, you're going to get a better FCR. And not all farmers will adopt those kinds of feeds and be willing to pay those kinds of premiums, but there is a segment of farmers out there that are the early adopters. They understand that paying for a better quality feed will give me a better result, and the economics of the value of the crop versus the cost of the feed more than makes up for that cost increase. But I do understand from a feed miller's perspective that we can't come in and say, oh, we're going to sell you our product for $5 a kilogram, because that's just never going to work. So as an industry, we need to get our scale economics working so that we can be providing these ingredients to nutritionists at a cost that's going to work for them, but also recognizing that there's a lot of additional benefits that come from using these variety of new ingredients.
Yeah, thanks, John. Maybe Adrian, talking about functionality of feed ingredients, that's obviously very much your field as a feed additive company. What's your comment on what John said? Can you, for example, produce feed additives that specifically help alternative proteins to become more efficient, improve feed conversion, and reduce mortality?
Thank you. And okay, so I totally agree with what John said. I think the big part of it is, of course, the grains, but a lot more and more today we are really looking into innovation, novel feed ingredients that can complement and enhance the functionality of the feed. I think on the Adisseo level today, we are really spending a lot of time not really just to look at reduced feed costs, but also researching, understanding a little more about how, for example, we can improve nutrition and gut health of the species that we want to target. I think these are very important because this will really fully complement how we can add value to the aquaculture industry. And on top of that, we also look at different areas. For example, it's not just about feed cost, mortality. Another way we look at it is how can you improve, for example, productivity by, for example, having better breeders, having better fertility of your brood stock, for example. And on the downstream, how can we work with partners, like JAPFA, like Nutreco themselves, for their customers? For example, they are looking at a better fillet quality, and it's not directly linked to just lower cost, better feed quality. And today, better feed quality is well documented with science when you look at antioxidative capacity, which means the ability for actually the fishes or marine species or shrimp to be able to handle stress, and also drip loss and many of these issues. And when we talk about sustainability, for sure, alternative protein is one of the key subjects we are looking at. But also at the same time, if we as feed additive manufacturers can complement our role in this industry, for example, how can we address sustainability? We are not God. We cannot address all the problems of the world. Yeah, and we try to address some key issues. Like, for example, I think here in Adisseo, we're looking at areas where we want to work together with our partners, which are the feed makers, finally the consumers themselves. For example, how to reduce waste. And we know we have novel ingredients that we need to educate customers. For example, look, if I have a novel ingredient that can complement at comparative cost of feed of production, I can improve your fertility. I can, Mr. Rob and Mr. Erwin, at your customer's place, tell them I improve the shelf life of the meat that you produce, the seafood that you sell, to the supermarkets and the chains. This will be a real game changer when you talk about sustainability. And for me, I think this.
But how would that change feed?
Say again?
How would that change the feed ingredients and the profile of the feed ingredients?
It will not change because these are added on top. Again, the key question, like what Rob and Erwin have mentioned very clearly, it's how can you demonstrate this additional benefit can add value to the consumers. And how, for example, if you have novel feed ingredients, you can actually add value. For example, everyone talks about mortality, and we know that nutrition only begins in the gut.
Yeah, for sure. But this is about insustainable or unsustainability of current feed ingredients, and whether fish meal is a sustainable source of protein for feed ingredients is a very debatable topic. And there's people that say we can sustainably harvest 4 million tons of fish meal per year. But I think on the soy side, which is an even more important feed ingredient these days, that's arguably very unsustainable. And I'd actually be incredibly excited about seeing some of these startups, well, they're not really startups anymore, but see them actually disrupt that supply chain, because it's not one that I want to have around in the next 10 years. But I see you, Rob, did you want to comment on what?
Well, I think fully agree with what's being said, but we should. And as a feed producer, I'm all in favor of finding constant new ways of bringing better alternative proteins and ingredients to further improve the feed. But it's not only the feed, right? It's the feeding with precision, automated feeding systems, farming practices, health, prevention of disease. All of those things come together for us to be able to really be effective, because ultimately we will have to start to produce more with less ingredients and be very much more sustainable, more cost efficient, and more efficient with the resources that you use. So it's never only the feed, it's all of it together.
That's true, but this panel is mostly about feed today. I agree though, it's a combination of things that end up improving efficiencies. But if we can agree jointly that we currently have a problem with feed ingredients being ecologically unsustainable, not economically, ecologically unsustainable, then I feel like we have to discuss seriously these alternatives that are provided to us here. And then also the question to you guys, maybe Clement again, because 3-4 years ago when we had similar panel conversations, it was always about we need to get more capital, we can't scale. But if you look between those two, I don't know exactly how much you have raised. I know you've raised more than 100 million. You've also raised quite a bit, Clement. So now this has happened to a degree. How much longer do you think you need, and what else do you think you need to get to a level where you can become the standard?
I think we need two things. First, we need to develop highly performing products and to prove the performance of this product. It's not only about replacing fish meal or other high-value ingredients. It's about demonstrating the functionality of the products. And to do so, you need to invest into trials. And in InnovaFeed, we have launched, for instance, over the last two years, 20 trials demonstrating the performance of our feed on salmon and shrimps. And the second element you need is to develop a competitive production model. And it takes three things: scale, technology, and a good model. For scale, it's coming. All the players are building large-scale facility. At InnovaFeed, we have built this year a 15,000 tons insect protein production and the production will start fourth quarter of next year. On the technology part, that is what is required to operate at a very large scale, the production of insects. It involves metering.
Can I just jump in? How much of the 50,000 you will produce this year, 50,000 tons? There's about, in Europe, about, I would say, 2 million tons of aquafeeds produced. What is the number in Southeast Asia? Do you happen to know that, Erwin? Well, it's millions of tons, but 50,000 is a dent. That's not nothing. How much?
To feed the requirements for the next decade, you need 45 million tons more
of aquafeed. Okay, yeah, that's a lot. So how much in percentage of the 50,000 goes into aquafeed versus pet food versus directly human consumption?
I would say that the largest market segment is clearly aquaculture. And I guess that the most ambitious alternative protein players are very much focusing on this market because they want to provide solutions at scale. I would say that within the 10 next years, insect protein industry might be able to provide for the market 1 million tons of ingredients. It will take rollout of the technology in several geographies with the right model in Europe, United States, and potentially Southeast Asia. And we need also to exploit all the waste and co-product deposits that are largely available in these geographies.
Please, John.
If I can weigh in on that, I mean, I think aquaculture feed producers, I mean, like Suwendi, JAPFA, et cetera, they're not going to include a novel ingredient in their standard diets until they're assured that there's a sufficient quantity available, and not quantity from just one supplier. It's going to have to be an industry that's working together to supply that. If we think about what's a relevant quantity as an industry, I mean, you know, insect proteins, we're going to have to get our industry to at least 100,000 tons a year across the various players before we're going to start seeing black soldier fly meal as a mainstream ingredient in grow-out diets for salmon or shrimp or others. And we're all working under a very fast timeline to get there. The other thing, though, is there's a lot of capital that's going to be needed to get there. My guess is that there's going to be $7 to $10 billion that's going to have to be invested in black soldier fly capacity in order to get the industry to something like a million tons or more of production over the next decade. And I think the funds are there. There's a lot of interest in getting there. But as an industry, it's critical that we all work together to try to get our production up to scalable levels, and that we work together to make sure that we're producing a quality product across manufacturers so that, you know, a Suwendi or a JAPFA knows they can go out into the market, buy black soldier fly meal that is a relatively consistent product, et cetera, like the fish meal industry did when they started creating their grades of product, et cetera. And I think, you know, we talk together with the InnovaFeed team as well, and I think the industry in general is starting to come together to do that. And but we also talked to some of the other alternative ingredient suppliers about, you know, how can we combine our products, for example, to make an ideal amino acid profile, et cetera. So I think as an industry, not just within a single ingredient, but across ingredients, I do see the industry coming together to provide sufficient quantities that feed millers and nutritionists can be confident to start formulating these products into their standard feeds.
Thank you, John. I want to take a second if there's any audience questions maybe in the meantime. Yep, there's one over there.
Surprised you can see it.
Hi, thank you everybody for today's talk. Alexander Kieran from Farm 66. Granted, I'm asking this question with a splash of ignorance. The two questions that you had asked everybody to vote on today, one being what is the biggest challenge affecting aquaculture producers in Asia? But the question I'm also asking is geared towards the end consumer as well, and thus the little bit of ignorance on my part, which isn't something that is a big concern from the fish farming standpoint is is like all conventional farming practices, the use of antibiotics or medicine to control the spread of disease in fish farms?
Who would you like to answer it?
The panel, please.
Well, it is a concern, right? So, but for instance, in Norway, there's hardly any antibiotics used to produce salmon. It's almost antibiotic-free, and like I said before, it's really important because people die of being resistant against antibiotics. So avoiding also in this area, in the aquaculture, to use antibiotics as growth promoters or just broad in preventing disease, I think is really important, and it should be very high on everyone's agenda.
Adrian, you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I'll recount on that. I think antibiotic, is almost like an epidemic or pandemic, and WHO has already declared it. We know that probably in Asia, consumers or our customers are more price sensitive. So the question here is you also need a lot of government intervention, subsidies, investment. Today, I think you have a lot of novel molecules, as I mentioned earlier on my part, how we have novel ingredients that can really help improve the immunity of fishes or shrimps. There are. And the question next is regulation. If you look on the livestock world in Indonesia, Vietnam, they have went AGP free in 2018. But the real fact is in actual implementation, there's always leeway where people are skirting around the regulations. So I think a big part of moving away from it is first to create awareness. So consumers have to say, I don't want this. Just like KFC and McDonald's who say, I will not buy any antibiotics-laden meat. So it comes from the consumer, one thing. And secondly, you need really very strong government involvement, implementation to say you have to get this out. And it just has to be very, very clear.
Thank you, Adrian. Any other questions? Yep, one here.
Okay, awesome. Hans Ringi, farmer and student from the United States. So you talked a lot about novel ingredients, but when it comes to the current ingredients that are in fish feed, what are the hardest ones to source, and what is your ideal way of sourcing them?
Great question. Who are you addressing?
Anyone with an answer.
All right. Erwin, do you want to?
Again, what is the hardest?
What are the hardest ingredients to source at the moment in your feeds?
Well, we have not been relying anymore on fish meal for our freshwater fish. And we are now moving towards for our stream feed without any fish meal. So at the moment, like animal ingredients, animal protein is huge and is abundant with a very reasonable price. That's actually the challenge. I always talk to our supplier, please benchmark to the animal ingredients, not only the fish meal, but the animal ingredients, right? So basically for us, how we can, we are on the business, right? We are not a research center. We are not, but the best thing is, how you guys demonstrate, or we can also test the products to benchmark with our current ingredients, like what we are having now. Mainly the plant ingredient, the soya, and also the animal proteins.
So what's interesting is that the environment of ingredients is very different from Southeast Asia to Europe and to the Americas, right? So you have in Europe no genetically modified ingredients. You've got no what's called processed animal proteins, which is, well, actually the insects also fall under that regulation, but that's usually blood meal and feather meal and these things. So byproducts from the livestock industry. And that's what it also makes it interesting, Rob, to maybe hear from you what are your hardest ingredients to source at the moment?
Well, Carsten, fortunately we've been able to source just about everything we need so far, but one of the challenges actually going forward, and you relate to it, is genetically modified organisms. If you want to use, for instance, genetically modified plants to produce long-chain high omega-3 fatty acids, that is really almost impossible. It's impossible with today's regulations in Europe. So tackling that is not so much the sourcing per se, but I think it's dealing with the regulators and being able to convince them with science that there's no need to really be afraid of these genetically modified materials. And that's a real challenge, and it's one that we need to tackle.
Yeah, good one.
Yeah, I was just gonna. I mean, I think we had a discussion around at coffee this morning. You're a farmer in Iowa, right? When I was running the feed mill before, we had a customer that was selling their shrimp to a retailer in Europe, and they said, look, for our feeds, you need to give us a GMO-free feed. And believe it or not, it was almost impossible to find a non-GMO soybean meal. We had to look really long and hard. So, I mean, given what you could be farming there, I think non-GMO products might be interesting even in the plant protein space and getting away from that genetically modified crop.
Erwin, do you see a shift in the Southeast Asian consumers regarding GM?
Actually, some customer asking us, like we have the yield operation, and always they're asking about how much the percentage of the GMO of the soya that you have been using. For sure, it's difficult for us to source the non-GMO soya. It's gonna be difficult, and it will be, if we get it, the one is gonna be very high price of the feed. It's really impossible. So, yeah, I think there is a bit being shift from the, especially the export market, like the eel, the tilapia. They're asking about the, the portion of the GMO in the feed, at least.
Yep. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, perfect. Well, maybe I want to get back to essentially the point of capital invested in this industry. Now, obviously, there's been now hundreds of millions invested in this industry, which is much different than it was 3 to 4 years ago. But at the same time, I mean, I know from personal experience, if you try to raise funds for an alternative protein company, every investor asks you, hey, do you have offtake agreements? Do you have clients, right? And then you try to go out and get those, but it's a hen-egg question because the feed manufacturers ask you, well, how much can you supply? And you got to say, well, a couple of tons max from the pilot plant. And then you kind of have to bluff your way through and say, yeah, in 18 months we'll have a huge factory supplying 30,000 tons, but you can't really, you can't really ensure that because you do that in order to get the offtake agreements to go back to your investor to get the money to build the factory. So it's a massive hen-egg question. And you were just nodding, John. Do you have the same? Did you make the same experience?
Yeah, I mean, we had a breakfast roundtable with one of the ministers yesterday morning, and one of the questions that came up from the people around the table was, or one of the requests is that project finance is critical. I mean, our factories cost tens of millions of dollars. They are technologically very complex facilities. And we being poor startups, we don't have the balance sheet to be able to build those factories, and we can't point to a legacy of operations that would give a traditional funder comfort around that. So the first question they ask is, okay, where's your offtake agreement? And the challenge with that is, as a feed companies don't take long forward positions in raw materials very much, right? I mean, maybe
well,
a little bit.
Well, is that something they maybe should be doing?
Sorry?
Is that something they should be doing?
I would love it if they would. It would make our lives a lot easier.
Would you love it too, Rob?
We do. We work with quite a number of alternative protein producers, and we do make agreements, but we're not for every single agreement where you make you can't just make long-term agreements and still make a profitable business, right? We're here to save the planet, but also run a business. So it's
okay. Yeah, no, for sure. Maybe even the other way around, but yeah. John, you were not ready. I interrupted you. No.
No. I mean, I understand the situation that they're in, and I think what we've seen is there's a lot of willingness to commit to volumes and commit to an indicative price, but not to give long-term forward contracts. Because I also realize that for feed companies, it's difficult to predict your volumes. You don't know how much you're going to need to buy at any given time, etc. But I think as long as the industry works together and we can get funding. Investors in that are willing to do project funding, if they understand the nature of the downstream customers, etc., it's a manageable issue.
Thanks, John. So one interesting question for you, Adrian, because you're essentially the only one here who isn't either a customer or a producer of alternative protein. So you are the only independent person. Now, if you had to give your qualified assessment on what type of alternative protein would make it to market first in 5 years from today? And I'm saying this can be black soldier fly insect, this could be mealworm, this could be single-cell protein of the likes that Callista has to offer, it could be single-cell protein of the likes that have different raw materials as carbon sources. You know the drill. Which one do you think will make it first?
I'll try to comment a little bit and stay neutral because we have our own stand on that, to be honest.
This is a panel. You're supposed to take position.
So, I'll speak for Asia. From today to 2030, food consumption or food expenditure will go from 4 trillion to 8 trillion by 2030. And of this, double of the growth, the 4 trillion, this is 60 to 70% of the growth is going to come from this very place we call Asia. And who's going to make the choice? Not you, not us, and not the audience here. It's the millennials and the Generation Z. And these guys are going to make the decision and tell us what they want. In the past, we want it cheap. We want it more. But in fact, it's not just that. They not only want it cheap and more, they want it more sustainable, they want it safe, they want everything, and at the lowest cost possible. So we need to continue to innovate. This is our role. And if you ask me, coming from a feed additive supplier point of view, I think one key area about alternative protein that will really take off is you can address all these key issues on sustainability, on safety, on ensuring quality and traceability, and last but not least, affordability. I mean, you have to really tick the boxes on 4 of these.
Let's not be kidding ourselves. It's affordability is what drives this race right now.
Yeah,
right?
because everyone is talking about sustainability, but when you ask our consumers who will decide our future, they want everything, but they still want it cheap.
No, I get it, but it kind of, Clement was saying they have to actually go around the supply chain, go directly to the consumer and work with the consumer to build a brand to then create demand. That sounds tedious to me. I wonder why there can't be a push from the farmers or from the feed manufacturers directly.
And that's what's happening.
Okay.
For instance, we work with IKEA in this project called Feedex. IKEA, we work on it together. There's WWF. We have committed to, by 2025, convert 10% of the total feed produced for salmon and shrimp to alternative proteins that are sustainable. So that's quite a substantial shift in a relatively short term. And we're doing that all together in the chain.
Erwin, do you have a similar program at JAPFA?
At the moment, we have the CSR, right? There's a JAPFA for kids. We're trying to promote the kids with a healthy food coming from the healthy feed. So we're trying to not relying anymore. Our program is fish meal free. It has been already more than 3-5 years. We're not using any more fish meal for our freshwater fish. Indonesia is one of the largest, maybe I think the second after China, that producing tilapia and carp. Those feed that we sell until now is no more fish meal. This is how we educate to the farmers.
Very good,
right.
Very good. Thank you. Are there any other audience questions now coming up? All right, not for now. So I think we're a bit over time, so I'm going to try to summarize this for you. Actually, one more question maybe to you, Rob. So do you see the alternative protein industry as an opportunity, or is it also sometimes a threat to your business and a necessary evil that you need to deal with?
No, as an opportunity. Absolutely.
Okay. Same for you, Erwin?
Yeah, it's an opportunity.
Okay, and if you guys, Clement and John, you had one ask to your clients essentially, what would that ask be? Can you formulate something that they can take home to help not just you guys, but everybody working on alternative protein ingredients, alternative ingredients generally?
I mean, we would love to have deeper collaborations with the downstream industry. We do have some, but we would like to have deeper collaborations because there's things we can do in our manufacturing process to change the parameters or characteristics of the products that we produce. And also, we have a product development pipeline, so we'd love to engage in a deeper way to understand where, give us a steer for where we can focus our efforts so that we can jointly develop the product, basically. I think that would be our biggest task.
I would agree. I think that pretty much has been, quite a lot has been done over the last 2 years in this field from several players. And I would say, let's carry on what we are doing, collaborating on R&D, because you have knowledge to help us developing the products you need for the future, and also involve us in the marketing of the product, because I think we can bring value in selling our ingredients.
All right, thank you very much. That's been a great panel. Thank you. I think we are on a good trajectory here with the whole alternative protein field. I've been following the space the last 5 years. It's never been that positive, really. There's never been that much happening, also in terms of industry engagement, and that's great. So I hope next year and the year after this will continue to be the case, and in a couple of years from now we sit here and well, we don't even need to call it alternative proteins anymore, it's just proteins. So thank you very much.